You're listening to episode 8 of the On Being Human podcast. Heads up, this episode contains explicit language. This episode is brought to you by the On Being Human podcast Love Story Contest. Submit a 1 to 3 minute voice memo file you recorded on your phone by saying your first and last name and what you love about your significant other, or tell a sweet story about how you met or your favorite memory together, for example. By submitting the recording, you have a chance to be featured on a podcast episode in February 2019. You will be entered to win a $50 Visa gift card. For more details, find me on Facebook at Brandy Fleck Creative and look for the latest video. Submission guidelines will be on onbeinghumanpodcast.com in January 2019. The submission deadline is January 25th, 2019. Hey everybody, this is a little side note to let you know that this is the last episode for 2018. The next 2 Tuesdays are Christmas and New Year's Day, and since we air weekly on Tuesdays, we're going to celebrate the holidays. So have a wonderful holiday season and Happy New Year. I look forward to delivering more soul-exposing explorations of what it means to be human, starting on January 8th.
Welcome to the On Being Human podcast, where we believe transforming ourselves can positively transform society. Your host, Brandy Fleck, has the honor of exploring the human condition with real people who bravely share their personal stories of adversity, healing, joy, and more. If you're seeking empowerment, strength, and inspiration, listen in to engage and explore tough topics that help us humanize one another, understand ourselves better, spread love, and connect.
This is part 2 of a 2-part series on a journey with Cushing's disease. Guest Tiffanny Thomason appears with her husband Josh Thomason to talk about what she's been through personally and what they've been through as a couple due to Cushing's. Last week, Tiffanny detailed brain surgery, recovery, and physical symptoms of the disease from the beginning until present, and Josh discussed having empathy. Check out that popular episode at onbeinghumanpodcast.com/episodes/007. This week, Tiffanny and Josh focus more on the emotional transitions throughout the journey involving career impact, rolling with the punches when your life plan changes, and focusing on persistence to get to the bottom of what's going on medically, even if it takes a while. Plus, Josh describes his feelings surrounding the transition to caretaking and support. So let's dive in to get to know these two as a couple and hear about navigating the emotions and impact a rare disease has externally. Plus, Tiffanny and Josh give some awesome tactical steps you can take to be your own advocate if you're on a similar health journey.
So, for any listeners or people who may even know us already, I have a master's in school counseling. That's what I went to grad school with. I transitioned from a human service field and decided to go more specialized into school counseling. So I have a master's in educational psychology, and I graduated in May of 2012 and got sick, or to the point where I was not able to walk and my muscles were really weak. 6 months, I think it was 6 months. I graduated in May and got sick in October of 2012. So, talk about watching kind of everything you worked for kind of crumble.
Right.
And in that moment, I didn't really know that this was going to be a lifelong, I had no idea. It was kind of like a mystery diagnosis at that point. Nobody really knew what was going on. They were just kind of throwing things at me, a lot of psychiatric diagnoses, oh, you can't walk because you have a urinary tract infection, that's really bad, and this, that, the other, a bunch of really random things. And nobody was really looking at the whole picture, the whole history that started kind of essentially the transition within right at the end of high school, right when puberty, I guess, would have been really taking its peak is kind of when it all started. But nobody really even thought of any of that at the time. Mm-hmm. And so, I watched my career kind of, or any kind of, aspiration I had to be a school counselor. It was well, I guess that's not happening right now. But I always kind of kept it in the back of my mind, oh, I'll get better, and I'll get back to it. Mm-hmm. I didn't know, that was in 2012. So I didn't know 6 years later that I would, be where I am, obviously. But it was last year where, for a while, for several years, I was doing things that I knew my body could handle. And one of those were just accommodating to myself by taking care of children within our community, within our home, after school, because I knew, okay, that's only a couple hours a day. I can handle that, So I did that, but I still was like, oh, I'll get back to working in a school. Like last school year, might even been the school year before, I think I even applied for some local positions, and I hadn't gotten a position. And when every time I would not get a position, I would say, well, I guess it's not the time. Like, there must be a reason why I've not gotten a position. And that I simply kind of just validate it by saying, oh, I guess my body's not ready, or there's got to be a reason why I've not received a position. So for a while, I kind of went through a little bit of a depression, because it was like, Josh is working really hard and providing, and, between 2017, like spring of 17, I hadn't had any income. So it was like, I felt like I was kind of a failure, because I'm like, I'm just here, like I'm in existence. And I used to tell Josh, like, I feel like I'm just a dependent. Like, I don't feel like I contribute. Like, it was really hard to come to terms with where my life was at that point, because it went from being fully active to like having everything lined, to having to do like just make do with something, to find something to do, to not being able to function and do anything at all. And so it wasn't until like I kind of had this conversation with Josh. Josh and I are very fortunate that we're able to have a lot of like meaningful conversations where it's like, hey, this is kind of where I'm feeling. Can you help me? This is where I'm at. Like, what do we do about it, kind of thing. And he always kind of like pokes and prods and tries to help me like see things differently, and always look at things from a different perspective. So I'm very blessed in that sense. And I really think that he's what helped me kind of see the light at the end of this tunnel, because it was like, hey, Tiffany, you've got to stop judging yourself based on who you were 6 years ago. You've got to start focusing on who you are now, what you're capable of, and what can you do with what you've got, pretty much, and stop trying to fit my life into some sort of mold that existed before I got sick. So within that conversation, we started thinking about maybe I need to go back to school, not necessarily to get another degree. That at all did not interest me, but just to learn a different trade, learn something different that would allow me to work at my own pace, where I didn't have to worry about, oh, I feel sick today, I don't really feel like going to class. So we looked into some online things, and I ended up getting enrolled actually beginning of this year. So this was New Year's Eve. It's actually this conversation we had about trying to reevaluate where my life was at. And the next day I had enrolled into a professional and continuing education program at Kennesaw State University here in Georgia. And I decided to do a medical billing and coding course. Now, my interest for that kind of came about because, as you can imagine, when you're dealing with a rare disease or two rare diseases, and, I've had almost over a decade of experience in the health profession dealing with my own stuff, and knowing how insurance companies work and how things get denied if they're not coded properly and all these things. So I kind of developed an interest in that, but also I knew that it didn't involve me to be physically present all the time, and that I could probably work part-time from home or something. So some of that appealed to me also. So I enlisted in that program in January, and then, I was still doing some more testing. And then, like I said, we found out that the source of my Cushing's was in the pituitary in April. Then I had the surgery in July. So it was like, oh my gosh, thank God I'm in this program, and that I was kind of ahead, and I can pace myself and kind of work at my own leisure. So I didn't have to worry about, oh, I'm going to have surgery, so I'm going to be gone from class. Like, it was just, I'll do it when I do it. I had a year to complete it. So I finished that in September or August And then I took my certification exam the week that we were leaving to go out of the country on our trip. I took it the day before we left, actually. So I recently
Awesome.
just became certified as or I just did the first step certification for medical billing and coding. So, I mean, I guess the big picture here is just like, things don't always go according to plan. And sometimes it took me years to finally come to accept, like, hey, that may never happen. And, like, it may not be what's best for me. And I think for a while I saw that as failure, because it was like, man, I spent all this money to go get a graduate degree, and now, like, I'm not even in the field. Like, that's crazy. But I mean, it was a real kind of like, when I talked about acceptance earlier, this is kind of one of the things that I think about is like just accepting this is where I am right now, and this is what's fulfilling me right now. And it doesn't mean that I'll never have an interest in working in schools or working with children. It's just right now, this is where my life is at, and coming to grips with what my body is able to do and what I'm able to contribute. So
that's really powerful. I'm really glad you shared that. And, even based in my own experiences and trying to relate to you, I know that sometimes we are in situations where it's not what we've planned, and you can still find happiness. I mean, do you agree with that? You can still find fulfillment.
Oh, absolutely. And I feel like that's why I constantly felt stuck, and why I felt like I wasn't contributing. And, because I was focused, like, I kept reverting back to the life pre-illness instead of, where think about what you've gone through, Tiffany. Like, your body is not the same, and it was kind of like I had to be realistic. I had to stop. I think I was just stuck, really. And it was just this conversation that Josh and I had where, about me not feeling like I was contributing, and feeling like, I wasn't pulling my weight, that kind of thing. And that's kind of what got this all kind of bubbling, and like, hey, like, you really have to rethink this. And so, yeah, I definitely believe happiness is possible regardless of situation. You just have to be willing to kind of reach for it, and reach outside of your comfort zone a little bit. And it may take some, it may not come to you overnight, but as long as you have vision for it, I think anything is attainable. So.
Gotcha. So you have talked a little bit about the emotions that you've gone through with your career and your life path in regards to your health and being diagnosed in different ways over the years. And then, Josh, as you came into the picture, you sort of joined this ride, I guess, of different diagnoses and symptoms, and not knowing and learning more things as time went on. Can you both tell me a little bit about what you went through mentally and emotionally as part of what you've called the roller coaster?
Josh, do you mind if I take this first?
Go for it.
Okay. So I kind of look at the process of diagnosis and how I dealt with it. Like I said before, it was kind of a mystery diagnosis initially. So, I had gone several years with symptoms, well before I was even diagnosed, or even a doctor would listen and entertain the idea. As I told you, I had gone a lot of like psychiatric diagnoses and misdiagnoses. So when you're in that kind of situation, and it's such a struggle and a fight, we have been to probably, I've lost count, but I've known we've traveled to at least 8 states, and I've seen specialists from all over the world. And this is even after diagnosis. Even with a diagnosis, there's still so much misunderstood, and a disease that's not very well understood at all. And so most people think of a diagnosis sometimes can be a good thing and a bad thing. A good thing in the sense that, oh, like, yay, we know what to do from here. We're good. And some people take it as kind of like, oh, like this is awful, like terrible. And so one of the things I kind of think about is like, because it took me so long to get to the point where I was even starting to get diagnosed, it was more of a relief rather than like a state of shock or sadness than that the typical person would have if they were given some sort of scary health news. So it's kind of like, you're kind of, in a way, it's like a rejoice, because it's like, yay, we don't have to fight with these doctors to prove to them that X, Y, and Z are happening. Like Josh had videos of me with symptoms and like things that were going on for us that he videoed and documented. And like, we travel with a binder that literally, like, it tells doctors point for point what year, what happened, this, that, the other. And we've become, less reliant, because I think we're raised, and a lot of people are under the assumptions that, in a health profession, doctors know everything. Doctors are supposed to be able to cure you. Doctors are supposed to be able to make you feel better. And in my case, that's not every doctor knows. Not every doctor understands. They're human too. So,
Right.
So for me, a diagnosis was like, hey, yay, oh my gosh, finally. It literally was almost like almost the same excitement as when you graduate and earn an award, like, because it's something I fought for. I fought hard for. I uprooted my life from Massachusetts to Nashville, to Vanderbilt, where I initially started getting diagnosed, because in Massachusetts, they were like, nope, you're crazy. There's nothing wrong with you. So, I mean, it's, for me, diagnosis equals victory, rather than like, oh my gosh, this happened to me.
Right. Well, that's a really great point of view, for sure.
So for me, like, you're talking about the like the roller coaster of everything. So to begin with everything, like, before Tiffany and I'd ever met, I'd never honestly really had a relationship. Most of the time I would date a person a few times, if even that, and then go separate ways. So to go from being single my entire life, essentially, to dating someone, to becoming married, to having to be a caretaker, has been one of the hardest challenges of my entire lifetime. I mean, I was a smart kid growing up. I had a good life, I would say. My parents loved each other, loved me. I have a sister who was good at the time, and well, she's still good, but she treated me good. And but then coming into this sort of like adversity and everything, just having to kind of deal with not only like the physical aspects of, hey, my wife is having this challenge and can't like get out of bed today, or okay, you've got to work and then you've got to like do everything around the house and take care of the dogs, and then next week we're going to need to go from Georgia to Virginia, and then 3 weeks later go down to Florida. And like, there was a lot of this that was totally new and foreign to me. And it is it's very tough being a caretaker, especially if you don't know what you're getting into completely. And not saying that Tiffany had any idea what we were getting into either, but
Right.
it was just a huge transition. And to every caretaker out there who may be listening, I feel you more than you ever know. So that was kind of the most overwhelming thing to me at first. I feel like we've got a pretty good grip on everything. Like Tiffany is saying, I try to be her rock as much as I can, give her positive encouragement, but it's sometimes as hard on her as it is me, or me and her. You get what I'm trying to say?
Sure. Definitely. And so, despite what may seem like setbacks and, not really knowing what the future held, as many of us don't. It seems that you've both still grown in love as a couple and in strength as people. And how do you both stay strong? Like, what are your tactics?
I think we just be completely open and honest with each other as much as we can. Like,
I would say, because she said strength, and it just kind of, or stay strong. And I think, truth be told, is like we don't actually always stay strong. And I think that's like the big thing that for a lot of people, it's like, oh, you have to be tough, you have to be strong, you can get through it. God doesn't give you anything you can't handle, and stuff like that. When you've gone through things like this, are not helpful, because I mean, at the end of the day, it's okay to be the very opposite of strong and feel weak and feel defeated. I mean, there are times where we just sit and hold each other and cry because we don't really know. There isn't always an answer. There isn't always an immediate plan, and we just kind of have to allow ourselves to feel, deal, and heal through whatever it is we face. It's not always something that's like, oh, you have to be strong today. It's just, I think knowing that we have each other and coming together, is really what helps us. We face something and knowing, hey, like, we're not alone in this. And for us, those support groups that I've mentioned are really helpful. Josh just recently joined as a caretaker, and I have to say, pre-surgery, like, it was really helpful for him. Because that was probably a time where he was the most stressed out, because of the fear of the unknown. Plus, I was kind of miserable. There was a lot of things happening. And so we rely heavily on a lot of support groups where people know what it is we're going through. And I would say that's how we stay positive, and that's how we stay in contact and not just absolutely lose our minds and go crazy for real. But often I think Josh is probably going to laugh when I say this, but I'm often the one to remind us, like, hey, this isn't permanent. Hey, this isn't forever. We'll get through this. Let's look at the glass half full versus half empty. And a lot of things recently, it's, I say in a lot of conversation with him is that a lot of times it's perspective. So we can sit here and feel sorry for ourselves and be like, oh, this is a really shitty situation, and oh my gosh, we're gonna just, melt. Or we can kind of grab ourselves by the britches and just, keep moving. And so that's just kind of my attitude. And I think that kind of attitude that I carry helps Josh in a lot of instances, whereas for him, it's a lot of the humor and a lot of the just being able to be there and be present and know, like, hey, I've got you. I'm not going to let you go kind of thing. And I'm more like the quit your bitching and keep moving kind of thing, So
I either add the humor or I try to be sweet. Whenever she's feeling down, I too kind of help spin it in a way that she's like, well, like, this really sucks. I don't know what to do. And I'm like, well, you've gotten through all this before. Like, you've faced so many challenges before. The answer may not be apparent right now, but there is a way to get through this. We just need to think about it, take some time, and
I think that's the
deal.
other thing for other people is, like, realizing that you it's okay to not have an immediate solution. We've had to get really comfortable with not having immediate answers, not having immediate solutions, and kind of fighting our way through things. It's not always in black and white. So I mean, that's really something to tell people is, like, hey, it's okay if you don't have an answer. It could be a week before you have an answer, but you got to just... It
could be years if you have an answer.
True,
yeah.
True. So what I'm hearing you guys say is that there are ups and downs, and sometimes, Tiffanny, when you have an up, Josh might have a down, and vice versa. And it sounds like you really balance each other out emotionally. And I also want to repeat, I think it was really powerful what you said is basically we don't always actually stay strong. It's okay to be weak. And then again, you just sort of reinforce that with, you're not always going to have an immediate answer. So I think that's a really good takeaway. So now I want to jump into how long have you guys been married and how long have you been together? And I think it's really important to sort of transition into this and keep getting to know you guys in that way.
So Tiffany and I have been married for not quite 3 years. We got married in February of 2016, but we had met, we actually met through an online dating site that she had signed up for right after she had her first surgery in Nashville. I'd been on the site for a while, and so the legend goes, I was the first and only person that she talked to on this service. And honestly, she was the one who contacted me. I had seen her picture a couple times pop up, and I literally was about to send her a message whenever she contacted me.
And I was only on the site for less than 24 hours, and I had already paid like for 6 months or a year, because it was like, hey, I was going to sign up for 6 months, and then it sends you a message and it's like, but why do that when you can pay this much and sign up for 12 months? So I was like, sure, I'm not going to meet somebody overnight. And well, little did I know I did meet somebody overnight. And
right.
So Josh was the first and last person that I ever made contact with on Match. So I had this profile for a whole year that I didn't even use.
Well, you met your husband. Yep. That's funny.
So
that's awesome.
I joke and tell people that he was like the best $150 investment I ever made.
That's awesome. So did you know when you first met him that he would be the kind of spouse that he is and be supportive and help you through this?
Oh, absolutely not. I don't think I was thinking like, oh, he's going to stick around. I mean, honestly, because even in the dating scene, it was like, why would anybody want to date me? Like I didn't really have anything to show, because it was like my career had fallen apart. I was sick, but I didn't let on all the details, obviously, early on, because even at that time, I wasn't very sure. I didn't know that I had tumors in a million places and that my life was going to be this way. But I would say, like, so I think I'll tell you, one of the first times that I kind of knew that, hey, he's in this kind of for the long haul is when my care got interrupted from Vanderbilt.
Mm-hmm.
So we started dating in November of 2013. And my care got interrupted in August of 2014. Right, Josh? Yes. So
Right.
One day I called him while he was at work, and I had just gone for a appointment at Vanderbilt, and they just sat me down and they're like, oh, your doctor's leaving. Like, he's got like 2 more weeks of clinic and then he's gone. And I was like, what? So it was just kind of like one of those things, like knocked you off your feet kind of thing. And I called him, panicked. I called him at work, and I'm like, Dr. So-and-so is leaving, and I don't know what I'm going to do. Like, he's really the only one that's really helped me. He's gotten me diagnosed, like this, that, the other. What are we going to do? Like, kind of panicked, and I could sense the sense of panic from him. So, after he got home from work and things and weeks of us trying to figure things out, it was like, I think the best thing for us to do at this point is to move where there's another neuroendocrine clinic that specializes in neuroendocrine tumors, which would be Emory. So it was like, I knew this doctor was leaving, and the doctor that took his place was trying to still diagnose me with something psychologically. So I was like, well, if Vanderbilt's not going to support me, I'm not staying here, since my other doctor was leaving. So I was like, well, what am I going to do? And granted, like, we actually fought. We had a fight about, a lot of things around this. And I think it's because, A, it was high stress. B, like we were fairly new in a relationship, and so that whole idea of moving somewhere and making that kind of commitment was scary. But we all eventually came to a like level head and was like, if this is what we're going to do, then let's do it, and knowing that Josh was willing and able to commit to something like that, not knowing like that our relationship was going to withstand all this stress and not really knowing how things are going to shape up. He was like, even though this scares the shit out of me, like I'm willing to do this. And I think that's kind of what told me like, hey, he doesn't just care about you, he loves you, and this is like, you're his partner. Like, I just knew he was really invested. And so, Josh, do you have anything to add to that?
Pretty immediately on, I knew that she was different than most anybody else I'd ever met and tried to be romantically involved with. She seemed genuine and sincere and actually showed a real interest in me beyond just what I knew and what I could do for her, which previously to that point, people would just kind of, oh, you go to concerts, oh, I'll take you, or hey, that's a free ticket and a free drink or whatever.
Yeah.
So, that had been most of my previous thing. She, like, whenever I would walk in the room, her eyes lit up, and I could tell that she sincerely and genuinely cared for me. So I had a pretty good feeling early on that even if it didn't last until like us getting married, I had a feeling that it could really be something and mean something. So
that's great.
So I had kind of an inkling that way. And what she's talking about, having to accommodate when her doctor left, that up to that point in my life, that was the single most frightening moment of my life.
Okay.
She called at work nearly in hysterics and made it to where I couldn't focus on work the rest of the day. Not through any fault of her own, but the situation freaked me out completely. Right. I mean, we had talked about like moving and which scared me because we had been dating a year. I first real relationship, a year into it, and I'm going to have to move away from everything I know in my entire life at that point to accommodate for someone else. So it took a lot of growing up and evaluating on my part. Like, do I be selfish and just want to stay with the life and the lifestyle I currently have, or is this more than me, and do I want it to be more than just what it currently is? So I mean, that probably was the point where I knew I had to make a real decision and either like step up in a huge way and make this become something more, or go about it. And I'm glad I did.
That's awesome. I thought you would say that. So that's good. So that was your fork in the road, and you chose this path, and now that you're on it, what advice would you give, Josh, to other spouses to be supportive and to take those steps to really hang in there even when things get tough?
Know that you're going to be wrong frequently.
Okay.
Know that you're not going to have the answers frequently, that plenty of times all you need to do is just shut up and listen. There are many times where I try to do more for my wife than she actually needs or even wants of me. Tiffanny can, even if it takes her some time, she can do most anything, even in the sickest times that she is. sometimes all she needs is for me to just be there to support her, like just be her cheerleader. I don't have to be a miracle worker, and in caretakers, you don't have to be a miracle worker either. Sometimes the best thing you can do is just be there.
Okay. And Tiffanny, what advice would you give for someone who's just received a similar diagnosis or has similar symptoms?
So let me think about this a little bit.
Okay.
So here's kind of a tricky thing is that in my situation, like, I'm not the only one that was kind of a mystery for a lot of people. As I've said, it takes a lot of work to get to a point where they're diagnosed. And so I feel like a lot of people that I know that have been on this journey or are about to be on this journey have a similar feeling, like when I talked to you about feeling victorious when you finally get to a diagnosis. And so I would feel like you're asking me about after they, or who is, after for somebody who's just received it. And I feel like by the time they get to a diagnosis, you become so much of your own advocate, and you learn, and you're educating yourself, and you're educating others, and you're talking with doctors over and over. And like sometimes, I even have a doctor who says to me, "Hey, Tiffanny, you know more than most of my medical students," And so I feel like really the message needs to go to anybody that is seeking a diagnosis and not really having received it.
Gotcha.
Seeking the diagnosis, if you've got symptoms that you're not sure of, that you're feeling like are becoming more and more of a pattern, little things just kind of, the biggest thing that kind of grinds my gears a lot is when people are saying, "Oh, you are what you eat," and are fat shaming, and everything is about, oh, well, that person must overeat, or that person this, and people become judgy just because somebody is overweight. And really, a lot of people don't understand that there are so many hormonal conditions that affect people's weight and their appearance. And I really wish that there was a lot more talk about that. Because, a lot of people do think, "Oh, I'm just gaining weight," or, "Oh, I'm overeating," or, "Oh, I'm fat," and this and that. And it becomes especially since it's common in females, it becomes a self-image thing. And so, so back to circling back to, giving some advice to somebody who's seeking a diagnosis, it would be track your symptoms, write them down, take videos, take pictures. Don't be afraid to question your doctors and what they're doing. Like, I can't tell you how many times I have to backtrack and that tests that get the wrong codes, that don't get ordered correctly. The orders get written incorrectly altogether. The wrong scans are done. And there are a lot of times where it's just simply the medical office staff or somebody who just isn't paying attention, and the littlest things fall through the cracks. So staying on top of it, like I said, questioning your doctor, "Doc, why are you doing this? Do you think this don't be afraid to offer a suggestion that you might have researched. Don't just always go to Google. Find research articles, things that have been studied and published, that those have a lot more weight than just, "Hey, Google, what's wrong with me?" Because then they'll think you're really crazy.
Right.
But just have some facts to back it up, and just say, "Hey, doc, do you think this might be a test that's worthwhile?" And there's been times where I'll go in and say, "Hey, I think I need my B12 checked," or, "Hey, I need this," and they do it, and lo and behold, yeah, there's an issue. So just really learning how to speak up for, don't think that just because they're an MD or in the medical and health profession that they know better than you. I think a lot of times people have this vision for themselves that, they don't know as much as somebody who is in the science field, and that's not always the case. So being confident in your ability to articulate and formulate what it is you need, and and talk with your doctor, have a conversation instead of it being like me versus you. And if you don't get answers and your doctor's not receiving of what you're asking and not really caring, and, you know, walk out, find another one. Josh can say, Josh, how many doctors have we been to?
We've been to a number of doctors.
And how many doctors have we walked? You know, there have been times where he's like, okay,
There have
this
been 2
doctor,
or 3 where I've wanted to walk out immediately.
Gotcha.
because as he's gone through this process, he realizes, you're right, not every doctor does understand. And he'll hear certain things from physicians, and you can clearly tell just by their response that they don't know anything about your condition. And at that point, if they're not being receptive, then you know chances are they're not going to help you. So go somewhere. I don't care if it takes 20 opinions, do it. Because, you know, and just things that there are a lot of things that are silent killers. And a lot of that is because people are like, oh, I got a sore throat. And I'm not saying become a hypochondriac and, you know, every ache and pain, analyze it. But just be mindful. You know, if it's one thing after another kind of piling up, write it down, track it, you know, take your vital signs, you know, watch your own, you know, a lot of these hospitals and clinics have patient logins where you can log in and take a look at your labs. You know, there's simple values that the lab represents, and you can tell whether your stuff's out of range or in range. Just for example, Josh went for his physical in August, and he had some things that came back wonky, and the doctor never called to report it to us and never said like, oh, these things came back abnormal.
Gotcha.
So it wasn't until like 3 or 4 weeks later where I was like calling about my own stuff. And I said, by the way, my husband had labs done at the same time as me, and he's had some abnormal things pop up. And she's like, oh, I'll have the doctor look at it. So it took forever for the doctor to even look at those results. And, you know, fortunate in his case, it was just he needed some supplementations and things. It wasn't anything emergent, but, you know, just think of things that fall through the cracks.
Right.
Doctors are overworked and underpaid, and, well, I don't know about underpaid, but definitely overworked,
Sure.
you know, trying to see many patients. So a lot of times it's not exactly their fault, but you have to really be on top. Is there anything else you can add, Josh?
Just for kind of your situation, if you really feel like something's wrong, like, you know your body better than anybody else. So there were plenty of times where just being on the outside looking at Tiffanny and her experience with doctors, they would say, oh, there's nothing wrong, like you should be fine. And had she not been persistent about, no, there's still something wrong here, like, we need to get to the bottom of this, like, she wouldn't be near where she is now if she hadn't been persistent and keep on trying to find a solution, because she knew that there was a problem even when people were telling her that there wasn't one.
Gotcha. So what I'm hearing you tell our listeners is be your own advocate. That is probably,
absolutely,
yeah, the most important thing that you can do for your own health. And on that note, you guys, I want to ask you the last question of the episode, which is, what does being human mean to both of you?
So for me, at some points, I think it has a lot to do with failure and what you do to overcome it. I mean, in the pure sense of beings or machines or anything, failure happens. Failure is part of life. There are things that I fail to do as a husband daily, weekly, whether it's I don't pick up after myself sometimes and it drives Tiffanny crazy, or hey, I've missed a deadline at work. But being human is your response to that failure, what you do in order to improve things and learn from that failure. Like, how can I take this event and make it into something good? And And to me, that's kind of what being human is all about, is learning from mistakes, becoming a better person, becoming a better thing just through experience.
Awesome, Josh. That was pretty awesome. So how am I supposed to beat that? No, like kind of piggybacking, but also I think it's really the themes have been kind of present throughout this whole episode. For us, what we're talking about is being human is being able to face adversity with sometimes a smile on your face. Also recognizing that it's okay to not be strong all the time and and acknowledging your weakness or your weak points. Being human is also what we talked about in terms of accepting change, accepting bad things, good things, whatever it is in your life that is present, and learning to you don't have to accept everything, but accept it for its good and accept it for its bad, loss, gain, whatever it is, however you want to associate yourself and your reality with acceptance. I think those are some really big themes that we've touched upon that are all part of being human. And I think, Josh, what you said about failure, I just wanted to make a point that, it doesn't always have to have a negative connotation, like, being, Brandy, you talked about happiness. So like being able to recognize like happiness is something you can attain in spite of whatever it is that shakes your life up a little bit. So, and I think lastly for me, being human is also about opening your perspective on things. You don't have to have that same perspective as Josh talked about, when he was younger, or as a young boy and being involved in some of the things that he was part of. Like, it's okay to have a changed perspective. It's okay to have an open perspective. It's okay to start a conversation with somebody and challenge them and talk about things that are uncomfortable or that may cause some friction, and not always just be passive, like, oh, I'm afraid this might offend somebody or hurt somebody's feelings, and really just talk with one another and communicate and understand that we just really have to all kind of get along and not be so angry and so, oh, well, that person has a different opinion than I do. Well, that's okay. They're entitled to it. So I think all those things are important about being human.
Well, you guys, that was such a great discussion. Thank you so much for coming on the show today and sharing your story with us.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yes.
Happy to talk anytime.
Yeah, it's been a real pleasure.
Aren't the Thomasons just so amazing? They've been through so much and talk about examples of resilience, support, and love. I hope they've truly inspired you and given you hope if you need it. For show notes, links, takeaways, and recommended resources, visit onbeinghumanpodcast.com/episodes/008. So there you have it. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Tune in weekly at onbeinghumanpodcast.com for more soul-exposing explorations of what it means to be human. Until next week, love to you all.